Hi everyone, my name is Tom Fabian. I am an assistant professor of sport management at University College Dublin, and I'm so sorry that I'm not able to be there with you today. But I am very excited about presenting this paper, which came from a pre-conference workshop actually held at Nash 2 years ago, that was on populism and sport. And my particular paper was on folk games and populism in Europe, which actually just came out, and that whole special issue came out in the JSH just recently. But this paper is a case study within that, and I'm going to present about Hungarian heritage populism through the lens of traditional games. So first off, though, just to set the scene, rather than an epochal break, the Trump presidency of 2017 to 2021 represents an extension of a divisive period in American politics, which itself is located within the context of a global populist age. So during this period, many nations have grappled with iterations of right-wing populist politics. But the recent rise of populism within various national and international political settings has been accompanied by an instrumentalization of both sport and heritage as pawns in advancing the populist politics of nation, ethnicity, gender, and identity. And in the last few years, heritage has become a potent tool in the ethno-cultural populist nexus that is. So moving on here. I want to talk a little bit about the cult of heritage. So UNESCO was founded in 1945. In 1972, you had the sort of UNESCO plaques and tourist sites that came about all over the world, and that represented what's called tangible heritage. And those are the monuments, statues, buildings, right? It took another 30 years until 2006 for the Intangible Cultural Heritage Convention to be passed by UNESCO, and ICH includes things like dance, traditional music, cuisines, festivals, handicrafts, and very importantly, traditional games. Now, the outcomes of the heritagization process within the UNESCO sphere happen to be ethnic nationalism, as in nation states are the ones that are forwarding these elements of ICH, but also cultural tourism, so that's great for the economy. But my question here today is, has heritage become a tool in broader populist politics? And I'd like to look at that in terms of traditional games. I spent a lot of time putting this one together, but traditional games are difficult to define. I look at them as an understudied aspect of sports studies and physical culture studies. They are often construed as backward and marginal and subaltern aspects of the broader sporting landscape. Yet, I find that they are worth exploring because of their cultural diversity, non-mainstream profile, and close connection to locality, ethnicity, and heritage, which also feeds very nicely into populism. All right, now let's get into the Hungarian stuff. So, just to give you some context on what this is about, we want to talk about Hungary's strongman. As a student, Viktor Orban was a freedom fighter near the end of Soviet control. But in 1988, well, in that sort of vein, in 1988, Orban founded Fidesz, which is the Alliance of Young Democrats, as a party for the underground liberal student movement in Hungary, which opposed the Socialist Workers' Party. They ended up forming a right-wing coalition government with the Christian Democratic People's Party in 2006. Today, cultural nationalism is a core value of the party, which is bolstered by ideas of territorial nostalgia. They ended up losing a lot of their country after the two world wars in which they were on the wrong side. And another very core value is Christian conservatism. Now, it's quite difficult to sort of get a sense for what Orban's self-described Christian illiberal democracy is. Are they anti-migrant? Are they Eurosceptic? Are they anti-global? Are they anti-modern? These are all hallmarks of right-wing populism, the confusion that comes around that. At the end Of the day, what Orban's brand is heritage populism. It's very nativistic, it's back to roots, it's about nostalgic folk peasant identity. And the way he does that is through this idea of the Hungaricum, which is a collection of national values adopted by the parliament in 2012. It includes things like salami and paprika, it includes various sort of art forms. Um, there was a $1 billion investment in the development of the Városliget City Park into one of Europe's most ambitious cultural hubs, which includes the Botanical Gardens and the National Gallery, but also the Museum of Ethnography, which is in the top right corner there. Folk games such as Meta, or Rounders, and Teke, which is bowling, have also seen a recent resurgence within the heartland region of Yaskun, which is in the yellow in the little map in the bottom there, where the ancient Cumanian and Yazidian tribes settled in the 13th century. So folk games are a part of this rise in heritage. And so we're going to, and I'll sort of give you the synopsis of one of that paper that I wrote. So folk games have often been linked to a rural, romantic, or ethnic nationalist past. Examples include the adoption of Schwingen wrestling as the Swiss national sport in the 1850s, or the 19th century Czech Sokol gymnastics movement, whose populist founder Miroslav Tiersch viewed mass gymnastics as the embodiment of a national spirit and at the forefront of a struggle for, quote, our homeland and nation. Traditional games, through their recognition as ICH, often are appropriated by nation states to advance an authorized version of the nation's history. So, for example, Alka in Croatia is known as a hotbed of extremist nationalism. In 2007, the Croatian president at the time affirmed the event's symbolism in the struggle for the ethno-nationalist homeland. Right-wing populism is what you would call volkish or ethno-nationalist. It's linked to the folk, but it's also linked to the nation. And these games of the common people, or folk games, have potent symbolic value. As Laszlo Kurti wrote, by the 1990s, Hungarian populists turned to the right with xenophobia, Christian fundamentalism, and a mythic folkloric vision of the peasantry. And this is important for the next three examples that I'm going to put forward. The first is the Táncház Revolution, which is an aspect of the 1970s Hungarian roots revival. It's really just a traditional folk dancing form. But as Corti described it, it's a sort of form of dance populism. It promoted the imagined peasantry through a coherent set of ideas offering cultural memory, authenticity, and expression of national heritage. Shannon's mystification of the peasant is crucial to this national nostalgia, in which the quote-unquote pure Hungarian peasant culture is under threat by the destructive forces of modern urban liberal society. It is in romanticized peasant culture and its associated folk traditions like dance and like games that populists, quote, find the most crystallized form of definition for national heritage. This is something that Kurti wrote again. At the 40th anniversary of the Táncház movement, a state secretary of the Ministry of National Resources, which is basically their cultural ministry, national resources they call it, claimed that the preservation of national folk culture provides the only possibility for the survival of Hungarians. So you can see with this kind of language around something like a traditional dance form that tradition and heritage is vital to this idea of Hungarianness that is pushed by the party. The second example that I want to put forward is the National Gallop, or the Nemzeti Vágta, which is a horse race held in Budapest. It was created in 2008 with the aim of reviving the country's ancient horse riding traditions in the form of a modern urban cultural event. Throughout history, the horse has played many roles: vehicle, laborer, food source, companion, weapon, and athlete. Furthermore, in many parts of the world, it is a symbol of rural romanticism, of ethnic national identity, hegemonic masculinity, and nostalgic folk culture. As a result of these enduring elements, the physical, cultural, political, and ideological imaginaries of the horse as a potent symbol of counter-modernity cannot be denied. And Orban uses the horse a lot in his examples of what the Hungarian people used to be. At the crux of this entire sort of narrative, the horse signifies the heartland, which defined by Paul Taggart is where in the populist imagination a virtuous and unified population resides. And I think this is really important going into our last and most important example, which is the Kurultai Horse Heritage Festival. Ultimately, it's a Central Asian nomad festival. It was established by the Magyar Turan Foundation, or MTF, and I'll get into Turanism in a second, in 2008. It's mass pageantry. There are war games, or folk dances, drumming, parades, crafts, exhibitions, lectures, and lots of traditional games, many of which are horse-based. The aim of this event is to strengthen ties between the ancient Central Asian steppe peoples using Attila the Hun. But this is an old debate, because there's actually no evidence that the Huns are connected to the Magyars being the Hungarian people. That said, even Orban claimed that Hungarians are descendant of Attila at a conference in Kyrgyzstan. In 2014, the Kurultai actually brought in 250,000 people, Europe's largest traditional holiday, and it was opened by a Fidesz Secretary of State. Here's a great byline for the Hungarian national newspaper, which says the Kurultai is the heartland. It's just feeding right into populist rhetoric, and the subtitle there is that there are people in the East among whom we are respected. So it goes back to this sort of back and forth that Orban is trying to push about whether they're a part of Europe, whether they're not, and whether they want to look to the East and all that kind of stuff. So the crux of this has to do with Turanism. So Turanism is a movement to historically and genealogically link Hungarian culture to the land inhabited by the nomadic tribes of Central Asia, hence why a lot of horse culture is being pushed right now. And also this sort of older history, this older heritage that bypasses the Austro-Hungarian Empire, it bypasses the Ottoman Turkish occupation, and goes right back to the Central Asians. So the leader of the Turan Federation is physical anthropologist András Zsolt-Bíró, who I had the pleasure of meeting with Marianne Vacci in early January and interviewing. And he maintains close relationships with Fidesz and has produced scientific research spurring racial imaginaries by uncovering a genetic relationship between Magyars and Magyars, a very small Turkic ethnic group in Kazakhstan. To provide, and at the end of the day, he's providing scholarly evidence for the proponents of Turanism, science for politics. But as you can tell in some of these photos, Biro, who's the fellow with the ponytail, the black hair and the ponytail in the middle of both photos, is speaking in the top photo to Bilal Erdogan, who is the son of the Turkish populist president Recep Erdogan, who Bilal happens to be the head of a traditional games organization. And then just below that, he's speaking to the former leader of the Organization of Turkish Nations. So anyway, to continue on, these are just sort of some interesting sort of links. By molding what Laura Jane Smith refers to as an authorized heritage discourse, populists are able to conflate notions of nativism, culturalism, and ethno-symbolism. Employed by the Fidesz government in its heritage populism, this Turanism movement is essentially a form of national nostalgia incited by a backlash against the West, against modernity and the universalist ethos of the European Union. The Kurultai provides an opening for such dissent, and the games of these imagined peasants, quote unquote, are the somatic element of contemporary heritage populism. So more so than contemporary sport forms, folk games and dances are fiercely nativistic, upheld as a radicalized expression of the body politic and considered a confluence of peasant heritage, locality of national culture, and romantic nationalism. Fidesz and Orbán, whose speeches provide ample proof of his belief in the connection between Christianity, right-wing politics, and Hungarian revisionist history, have trumpeted this Truanism in both internal and foreign politics. My theory is that via this Hungarian or Magyar heritage populism, Orbán is employing folk games as a means to empower the peasant identity narrative while also cozying up with like-minded Central Asian autocrats. Hopefully, I've been able to convince you of the potent relationship between illiberal democracies, this traditionalist ethos, and the power of traditional games. Thank you very much for your time today, and I hope you have a really great rest of your caucus. Cheers.